Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Christmas morning has this eerie way of pretending everything's okay. The twinkling lights, the fake fireplace channel crackling on TV, the smell of cinnamon rolls Mom didn't actually bake, just warmed from a tube, and the music, oh God, the music. That sickeningly cheerful playlist with Bing Crosby crooning about white Christmases while our family stood on the edge of a cliff no one wanted to admit existed. And yet there we were, all pretending, each one of us playing our roles like it was some goddamn Hallmark movie. Except I knew, deep in my gut, this Christmas was going to be the one no one ever forgot. I was 15, old enough to pick up on lies, but still young enough that people assumed I didn't get the subtext. My older sister Ashley was 20. Perfect, fragile, beautiful Ashley. She walked into the room late, of course, all dewy-eyed and hungover, wrapped in one of Dad's old college sweaters like she was starring in a perfume ad. Everyone acted like her showing up was a gift in itself. I sat on the floor near the tree, cross-legged, pretending to scroll my phone while really watching every detail, like a detective in some cheap crime drama. I noticed how Mom looked at Ashley. Not like a daughter, more like a ticking bomb she was relieved hadn't gone off yet. Then came the moment, the big reveal. Mom, with her too red lipstick and over-smoothed hair, reached under the tree and pulled out a tiny silver-wrapped box. Her hand trembled just enough for me to notice, not enough for Ashley to care. She handed it to her with a weird smile, one that said a lot more than "Merry Christmas." Ashley opened it with a lazy flick of her nails, and inside was a key. Just a single silver key on a ribbon. I knew immediately what it was. It wasn't just any key, it was a house key. Ashley looked confused for half a second, then looked up at Mom, who smiled wider and said, too softly for Dad to hear from the kitchen, "We got her a home. You'll understand when you grow up." Her eyes flicked to me when she said it, and I gave her the smile she expected. A smile so sharp it could slice glass, because I already understood. It wasn't just a house. It was silence. It was payback. It was the cost of years of pretending. That key was a golden ticket out of guilt, and Ashley was cashing in. Dad finally came in holding his mug like it was the only thing tethering him to earth. He was quieter than usual, like he already felt the ground shifting under his feet. He sat down in his recliner, and I handed him my gift. Just one, a single flat gold envelope. He looked confused. "You didn't have to get me anything, Rach," he mumbled, like every dad does, the same weak line every year. But he opened it anyway. Inside was one page, one sentence, no signature, no date, just 12 words. He read it once, then again. His hand started to shake. His face went pale. The color drained out of him like someone flipped a switch. Silence swept over the room so fast, I thought maybe the sound had just died. Ashley stood up staring at him, the key dangling in her hand. Mom froze with her fingers on a gift tag, not breathing, not blinking. Dad looked up at me, but not like a father looks at a daughter. More like a man looks at someone who just pulled the last Jenga piece. He said one word, just one. "How?" That's when I knew I'd hit the mark. That word told me everything. He didn't deny it, didn't ask what this was about, didn't even look at Ashley. He just looked at me and asked how I found out. Because he knew exactly what that paper said. And more importantly, he knew exactly what it meant. It's funny, all those years they treated me like the quiet one, the bookworm, the observer in the corner. They thought that meant I didn't see things. But I saw everything. The late-night arguments, the panicked phone calls, the whispering in the hallway when they thought I was asleep. I saw the way Ashley looked at Dad when she was 16 and broken, and the way Mom started drinking a little earlier every day the summer after that. But I didn't understand it, really understand it, until I found the envelope in the garage last year. Behind the water heater, stuffed inside an old shoebox, labeled Xmas Lights 2001. That box didn't have lights in it. It had something else entirely. You ever find something that makes your blood go cold, but your mind light up like fireworks? That's what it was, as that moment when every weird thing from childhood suddenly clicks into place and you realize the adults you trusted were playing a whole different game and that you've been a pawn the entire time. That's when I started planning. So this Christmas, this wasn't about family or joy or Jesus or any of that sugary crap. This was about truth. Cold, hard, ugly truth. And revenge. Not the dramatic scream in the street kind. The quiet kind. The kind that sits down, smiles politely, hands you a gift, and ruins you. I watched Dad sit back in his chair like someone unplugged him. Mom finally stood, her voice brittle, asking, "What is this, Rachel?" But I didn't answer. I just kept smiling, because the page didn't need explanation. That one sentence said everything. You ever wonder what could be written on a single sheet of paper that would make a grown man look like he just saw a ghost? Well, maybe you've had a moment like that too. Something small, something sharp, something you can't unread. What would you do if the truth was in your hands and everyone else was still unwrapping lies? Because that's exactly where I was sitting. And I wasn't done yet. There's something about being the youngest that people never talk about. Not really, not honestly. They'll say you're lucky because the pressure's off, the expectations have already been tested on the older one, and by the time you come along, your parents are too tired to enforce the rules with any real consistency. They say it like you're getting away with something, like being invisible is a privilege. But what they never mention is how being the youngest often means you're the one who's left out of the big decisions, the closed-door conversations, the whispered confessions over late-night drinks, the secret exchanges that happen just out of earshot. You get to see the shadows, but never the hand that casts them. You see your family through keyholes, from stairwells, from behind half-closed doors, and you grow up learning to read tone, to interpret silence, to notice the little things, the twitch in an eye, the pause before a response, the words that should be there but aren't. That's how it started, really, not with a revelation, but with those quiet gaps, those subtle inconsistencies that add up when you're paying attention. Ashley, my older sister, had always been the hurricane, loud, dramatic, needy in that way that demands everyone adjust their emotional thermostat to her weather. If she was sad, we all had to tiptoe. If she was happy, we were expected to applaud. If she was broken, which she often was, we became the glue whether we liked it or not. And Mom wrapped herself around Ashley like plastic wrap over leftovers, tight, suffocating, and desperate to preserve what was already spoiled. I remember the first time I realized Ashley had different rules. It was during sophomore year, when I came home with a B- in Algebra 2, and Dad gave me a 20-minute lecture about living up to my potential. That same week, Ashley backed her new Jeep into the mailbox while texting some college dropout she'd known for all of 5 minutes. And Mom just laughed like it was quirky, like her recklessness was some charming personality trait instead of a consistent liability. That Jeep, by the way, was a reward for getting through a tough time, which translated to her finishing a 90-day outpatient rehab after getting caught with a bottle of Xanax that wasn't prescribed to her. Dad never mentioned the B- again after that, but the message stuck anyway. Some of us get judged, others get forgiven before the sin even happens. I asked once, just once, why Ashley got so many second chances, and Mom didn't even blink before answering with that dreaded line. "You'll understand when you grow up." She said it like it was wisdom, like she was handing me a key to some locked door I wasn't ready to open yet. But all it really did was light a fire in me, because I didn't want to grow up just to understand why it was okay to ignore things that hurt. I wanted to understand why silence was treated like loyalty, and why the truth only mattered when it was convenient. There were little things that began to bother me more and more. How the lake house that used to be our family's sacred summer place suddenly became Ashley's space, as if we'd all just unanimously agreed that she owned it now. I was 12 the last time we all went there as a family, and I remember how the walls echoed in the nights, how I heard my name in voices that weren't speaking to me. One evening I found Mom crying in the laundry room, her hand pressed to the dryer door like it was the only thing keeping her upright, whispering, "She's just broken, that's all." And I didn't know if she meant Ashley or herself. The following year, the lake house became off limits. "We're giving her space to heal," Mom said. Like trauma was territorial. I asked Dad if that meant I couldn't go either, and he just muttered, "It's better this way," which didn't explain anything but shut the conversation down so firmly that I learned never to ask again. That's how secrets grow roots. They aren't planted with lies. They're watered with avoidance. Then 3 years later, I found the scrapbook. It was shoved behind a stack of old VHS tapes in the hall closet, the one no one ever used except to throw in junk no one wanted to admit still existed. It had been Ashley's, clearly, pictures from middle school, cheer camp, some sleepover birthday party. But one page was torn out, just one, and taped in its place was a folded napkin from a diner 3 towns over, the kind with those weird blue ink sketches from bored waitresses. On the back, someone had written in shaky handwriting, "Never again. I mean it. No name, no date, just that." I stared at it for a long time, like it might suddenly explain itself, like the napkin would confess what happened that made Ashley memorialize it like that. It didn't. But that's when I started writing things down. Notes, observations, timelines. I made a habit of listening when no one thought I was, and of writing it all down in a password-protected file called "When I Grow Up," because that phrase had started to sound less like a promise and more like a threat. And it wasn't just the lake house or the scrapbook. There were overheard phone calls, whispered arguments that cut off the second I walked into the room. I once caught Dad standing outside Ashley's locked door with his hand pressed flat against the wood, like he could will her to open it just by being there. I hid around the corner, watching him. He whispered, "I'm sorry," like she could hear him, and then walked away without knocking. I didn't ask what he was sorry for. I just wrote it down. That's the thing about secrets. They don't stay buried forever, not when someone's watching, not when someone refuses to grow up the way they're supposed to. Because I wasn't going to wait to understand. I was going to find out. And when I did, no one was going to be smiling. There's a strange kind of grief that creeps in when the truth starts to unravel. Not the loud kind that breaks dishes or cries in the middle of the night, but the quiet, corrosive kind that eats away at your trust in pieces so small you don't even notice they're gone until you try to lean on something and it collapses beneath you. I used to think the worst pain came from what people said, but I've come to realize that silence, purposeful, strategic, weaponized silence, can be far more violent than any shouted word, because silence gives space for things to rot, to fester, to twist into something unrecognizable and dangerous. That's what was happening in our family long before I had a name for it, long before I had the courage to look it in the face. I didn't set out to dig up anything. I wasn't on some mission, not at first. I was just trying to understand why everything felt off. Why our house was filled with noise but not conversation. Why we had dinners where everyone talked over each other without actually saying anything. It started with a basement cleanout project. Something I was doing mostly to avoid studying for finals, an excuse to poke around in the place that always felt like a crypt for old lies. That basement was like a time capsule of forgotten intentions. Boxes of half-used Christmas decorations, water-stained family photos, old toys no one could admit were no longer needed. I wasn't expecting to find anything. But that's the thing about secrets. They don't stay hidden forever. They wait quietly until someone finally opens the wrong box. It was an old banker's box, the kind with a broken lid and a faded label that said Receipts, Taxes, 2004. But inside, buried beneath some dry cleaning slips and a brittle warranty for a lawnmower we hadn't owned in a decade, was a manila envelope. No name, no markings, just thick enough to suggest importance, light enough to feel forgotten. I opened it slowly, half expecting it to be nothing, just another pile of forgotten paperwork. But what I found were photocopies, receipts, letters, emails, each one more confusing than the last. There was a record of a bank transfer from my parents to someone I'd never heard of, dated 6 months before Ashley's first stint in rehab. There were notes from what looked like a therapy session, though they weren't signed. and one letter, torn at the top like someone had ripped it open in a hurry, that began with the words, "Per our last conversation, I agree confidentiality is paramount." I read that line over and over until the words lost meaning, trying to fit it into some innocent framework. But the more I read, the less innocent it seemed. There were references to protecting the family's reputation, prior incidents, and one chilling phrase that made my stomach turn. To avoid legal escalation, the agreed terms must remain unchallenged. I didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but I knew what it felt like: a cover-up, a deal, a silence bought and paid for. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to decide whether to confront them, to ask the questions outright, but something told me that wouldn't work. These weren't the kind of secrets that got unpacked at the dinner table. These were the kind that had layers, insulation, plausible deniability baked into every corner. I needed more. I needed context. I needed a witness. So I went back to the envelope the next day. I pulled every thread I could. I traced one of the email addresses to a counseling office 2 towns over, one that specialized in family crisis intervention, whatever that meant. I called and pretended to be following up on a misplaced invoice. They said they didn't have a patient by my parents' names. But when I mentioned Ashley's name, the line went quiet for a beat too long, and then the receptionist said, "I'm sorry, we can't confirm or deny that information," which was all the confirmation I needed. Still, I didn't have enough. I had a suspicion. I had a pile of documents, but I needed something personal, something only they would recognize as undeniable. That's when I remembered the letter. I'd seen it once, years ago, during a fight Mom and Dad thought they were having quietly. I was maybe 10. They were in the garage, and Mom was holding a white envelope in both hands like it was a bomb she didn't know how to defuse. She kept saying, "We can't pretend it didn't happen." And Dad just kept repeating, "No one needs to know. No one else needs to get hurt." I hadn't thought about it in years, but now the memory came rushing back with terrifying clarity. I started tearing through the house. Closets, cabinets, old drawers stuffed with manuals for appliances we didn't even own anymore. And after 2 days of searching, I found it, tucked inside the back of a drawer in Mom's sewing table, behind a broken pair of scissors and a tangle of measuring tape. It wasn't an envelope anymore, just a single page, folded and worn soft at the creases. It was handwritten in blue ink, and though it wasn't signed, I knew immediately who had written it. It was from a family friend, Pastor Glenn, someone who'd stopped coming around when I was about 12. I never understood why until I read that letter. It didn't say much, just that he was concerned for Ashley's well-being, that he believed the family was not prepared to deal with the weight of what occurred, and that he had done what was asked, but could not condone the continued denial. That was the moment the bottom fell out. I sat there on the carpet, clutching that old, soft page in my hand, and everything clicked into place. Not in a clean, satisfying way, but in the kind of way that makes you want to throw up. I didn't know every detail. I didn't have a full picture. But I had enough. Enough to know that something happened to Ashley. Enough to know that my parents knew. Enough to know that instead of dealing with it, they covered it up, repackaged it as trauma, and tried to buy her peace through real estate and gaslighting. That silence? It wasn't love. It wasn't protection. It was guilt management, damage control disguised as compassion. And suddenly, I wasn't interested in understanding anymore. I was interested in justice. Or if that wasn't possible, then something colder, quieter, and far more satisfying. Revenge. There's a certain moment just before the point of no return when everything feels suspended in time. A brief silence in the storm, a space where the weight of all your choices hasn't quite landed yet, and you can still pretend you're just imagining things. That maybe if you breathe slowly enough, if you move carefully enough, you can step back into the world before everything started to unravel. I stood in that moment for weeks, balancing between the girl I had been, the girl who wanted answers but feared the cost, and the woman I was becoming, who no longer feared the cost because she'd already calculated the price and decided it was worth every goddamn penny. Once I had the letter, once I confirmed the counseling records and reread the emails I wasn't supposed to have, there was no going back to pretending. The idea that Ashley had merely been troubled, that she'd simply struggled with addiction or depression, or some other broad, convenient label, they had all built that narrative like a lifeboat, something we were expected to climb aboard and nod along with, never asking where the leak started. But that lifeboat had holes, and I was the only one willing to admit we were already sinking. I wasn't naive enough to believe I could save anyone, but I sure as hell could make sure the people who drilled the holes were finally forced to explain why. My plan wasn't some movie-style grand revenge spectacle. It wasn't about public humiliation or shouting matches or catching anyone in the act with a hidden camera. What I wanted was much quieter, but infinitely more devastating. I wanted the truth to breathe. I wanted it to sit down at the table on Christmas morning and unwrap itself, without needing anyone to point fingers or shout accusations. Because the thing about guilt is that it doesn't need to be proven, it just needs to be seen. Once it's out in the light, it burns all on its own. So I started preparing, not with rage or drama, but with the cold precision of someone who's lived too long with unanswered questions. I went back through every note I'd taken, every slip of paper, every whispered memory I'd collected over the years, and began putting the pieces into one simple package. I created a timeline, not for public consumption, but to keep myself grounded. I called an old family friend, Ron Jacobs, a former neighbor and now an attorney specializing in estate litigation, under the pretense of needing advice on a college paper. Ron had always liked me, always said I had an old soul, which is a nice way of saying I was the kid who didn't talk unless she had something real to say. I gave him only what he needed, a breadcrumb trail just long enough to get him curious, and he gave me exactly what I hoped for, legal documentation pulled from public record that showed my parents had quietly transferred the lake house into a private trust 3 years earlier, with Ashley listed as the sole beneficiary. That detail alone might not have been sinister in isolation, but paired with everything else, the therapy payments, the letter from Pastor Glenn, the hush money trail, it painted a story so damning it didn't need exclamation points. Then came the final step, the letter, or rather, the page. I spent 3 nights writing and rewriting it, trying to decide whether I should spell it out or leave it open-ended. In the end, I settled on 12 words. 12, because it felt biblical, because it felt clean. I won't tell you what the sentence said yet, because it doesn't matter until it lands in the right hands, in the right moment, surrounded by the right kind of silence. What matters is that it wasn't accusatory. It wasn't emotional. It was surgical. A sentence designed not to explain, but to expose. I printed it on the thickest paper I could find, cream-colored and heavy like it belonged in a law office or an old will. I slipped it into a gold envelope, the same kind Mom used for family Christmas cards, and wrote Dad's name on the front in careful, formal script. I wrapped it with a ribbon, because sometimes irony makes the blow land harder. Then I placed it under the tree like any other gift. No one noticed. No one ever really noticed me during the holidays, not since Ashley took up all the oxygen in the room. Christmas Eve was uneventful, which only made the tension inside me rise higher. Everyone smiled, everyone laughed. Dad made his usual spiked eggnog. Mom gushed about how proud she was of everything we've overcome. And Ashley, beautiful, fragile, performative Ashley, drank just enough to be the center of attention, but not enough to make anyone uncomfortable. It was like watching a rerun of a show I used to like, but now understood was deeply problematic. I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because I needed to be sharp the next morning. When the sun rose on Christmas morning, I was already awake. I lay in bed listening to the house stir to life, the clatter of dishes, the squeak of Mom's slippers in the hallway, the whisper of gift wrap being straightened under the tree. I joined them in the living room, dressed in flannel and forced warmth, playing the role I had rehearsed for years. We exchanged small talk, passed coffee, and made small exclamations of delight as the usual gifts were unwrapped. Sweaters, gadgets, little indulgences that no one really needed but were meant to represent affection. Then Mom stood, smiling too brightly, and handed Ashley the small box with the key. "This is from both of us," she said, voice trembling just slightly. "We got her a home you'll understand when you grow up." She looked at me as she said it, and I smiled back. Not the smile of a child being condescended to, but the smile of someone who had already grown up, grown past them, really, and was now watching the final performance of a long-running lie. Ashley looked at the key and pretended to be surprised, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the calculation, the knowledge that this was no surprise at all. Then it was my turn. I picked up the gold envelope and handed it to Dad. He looked amused, maybe even a little touched, like he thought this was going to be one of those heartfelt teenage notes about love and appreciation. He opened it slowly. He read the sentence once, then again, and for the second time in my life, I saw the exact moment when a man realizes the past has finally caught up with him. He didn't speak right away. His face drained of color, the corners of his mouth tightened, and he gripped the paper like it might dissolve if he let go. Ashley leaned forward, confused. "What is it?" she asked. "Is it a joke?" But I didn't answer. I just looked at her, the same way she used to look at me when she thought I didn't understand what was going on in our family. I looked at her like I was the mirror she had spent years avoiding, and then I said it, just loud enough for the room to hear. "No, it's your turn now." Because some gifts are meant to be opened slowly, and some are designed to explode. The thing about delivering a truth bomb on Christmas morning, especially when the room is already saturated with artificial joy, baked goods that taste like nostalgia, and a collective family agreement to never say what we really mean, is that no one knows what to do when you break the contract first. For a moment, when my father read the sentence on that thick, cream-colored page, everything froze. The lights on the tree still twinkled, Bing Crosby was still crooning about snow, and the coffee still steamed gently from Mom's favorite best mom ever mug. But the room itself seemed to detach from time, like the present had been ripped open just as cleanly as the envelope that had contained my revenge. He didn't look up right away. He just stared at the paper, fingers trembling so slightly I doubt anyone else noticed, but I did. I'd been watching him tremble all my life, though this was the first time it wasn't from exhaustion or performance or passive compliance. This was fear, plain and unmistakable. And while I wish I could say it brought me satisfaction, the truth is, it didn't, not exactly. Ashley, always alert to any shift that might threaten the gravity of her orbit, moved first. She leaned forward, the house key still dangling from her hand like some twisted symbol of entitlement, her voice sharp with disbelief, and that sick little whine she used whenever something wasn't going her way. "What is it? What's going on?" she asked. And even though the room wasn't supposed to be about her, not this time, she made it about her anyway, like she always did. Mom tried to step in, her instinct to smooth things over kicking in like muscle memory, but she'd speak fast enough. Didn't move soon enough because Dad finally looked up. There was a hollowness in his eyes I'd never seen before, not even in the worst of his silences, not even when we buried his brother, not even when Ashley was in the hospital for what we were told was an overdose but was actually, according to the documentation I'd found, something far less accidental. He looked at me and then at Mom, then back to Ashley, and finally, he looked at the paper again, as if hoping the sentence might change if he stared hard enough. But it didn't, because it was permanent. Unforgiving, just 12 words, a sentence so simple and clinical, it might as well have come from a legal file or a case report. But each word landed like a hammer. I didn't read it out loud. I didn't need to, because its power was in what it left unsaid, in the web of memory and implication and evidence I had collected and laid bare in a single strike. My mother's face went white as bone. Ashley said something petulant and defensive, but I couldn't hear her over the buzzing in my own ears, the surge of adrenaline that was no longer fear, but finality. I had done what I came to do. I had put the truth in the center of the room, and now it was going to burn everything it touched. The sentence was lifted directly from an old buried email written by a therapist who had counseled Ashley briefly when she was 16. An email never meant to see the light of day again. Oh, tucked into the bottom of that envelope in the basement like someone had been waiting for a better time to destroy it. The email had been forwarded to my father, who had replied only once with a single line. Understood. We'll handle it quietly. The therapist's original line, the one I had printed and placed in that envelope, said this: "The incident involved a minor family member and cannot be ethically dismissed." That's it. That was the sentence. No names, no dates. But it didn't need them, because everyone in that room knew who the minor had been. And suddenly it wasn't Christmas anymore. My mother crumpled into her chair like someone had pulled her spine out, and my father stood and left the room without a word, not even a glance back. Ashley screamed something about betrayal, about lies, but her voice was shaking and her face was wet, and no one came to defend her. I sat there watching the firelight flicker on our ornaments, feeling nothing and everything all at once. There was no triumph, no catharsis, only the surreal emptiness of finally doing the thing I had rehearsed 1,000 times in my head, and realizing that justice doesn't always feel like justice. It just feels like silence where chaos used to be. I didn't wait around to see what happened next. I got up, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the snow, not because I was running away, but because I didn't need to be there anymore. I'd said what needed to be said without speaking. The weight I had carried for so long, the weight of not knowing, of suspecting, of waiting for someone else to admit what I already knew, was gone. And in its place was something even heavier: clarity. I didn't send that page to the police. I didn't post it online or blackmail anyone. But I did send copies, 5 of them, to a short, carefully chosen list. One to my uncle in Oregon, who had always sensed something was off. One to Aunt June, who stopped speaking to Mom 10 years ago without explaining why. One to our family lawyer, just in case. One to Ron Jacobs, the attorney who helped me quietly connect the legal dots. And one final copy, unsigned and unmarked, to Ashley's ex-best friend Becca, who had stopped coming around after a certain night at the lake when we were both very young. I don't know what happened between them, but I've always suspected Becca knew more than she ever said. I don't know what they'll do with that information. I didn't include instructions. I didn't ask for anything. That's the thing about truth. You don't have to direct it. You just have to release it and let it do what it does best. As I walked down our snow-dusted street, leaving footprints that would disappear by morning, I thought about what Dad said when I was younger, during one of those awkward, too-late attempts to bond. He said, "One day, when you're older, you'll understand why we made the choices we did." But he was wrong. I didn't need to get older to understand. I needed to see them for who they were when they thought I wasn't looking. And now that I have, I can finally start building something of my own. Something honest. Something that doesn't require silence to survive. Let them keep their house. I gave them the truth. And it's not done with them yet.